Hi, everyone. Welcome to another conversation with an industry professional. Today, we're going to be speaking with a good friend and longtime collaborator, Dan Daly. Hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. What's your name? What's your profession? What are your pronouns?
hmm Hey, everyone. I'm Dan Daly. I go by he, him usually, and I design scenery and do other things like that here in Brooklyn.
Nice. And where did you go? Where did you go to school for grad and undergrad? You're an MFA, right?
Yeah, so my whole little spiel about where I'm from, I grew up in Massachusetts, and then I went to undergrad at Fitchburg State University. Woo!
I've been
Um,
there.
Yes, I'm sure that everyone has heard of that theater school, everyone in the world. No, but I got a really good, solid base education there. I actually went for technical theater, so like building scenery, hanging lights, doing all that sort of stuff. Then I spent a couple of years up in New Hampshire at the Winnipesaukee Playhouse, uh, being their technical director and designing a bunch of shows from up there. And then eventually I went to grad school at Carnegie Mellon, where I met the cool kid Tyler Holland, and everything else is history.
Yeah,
I
we were 2 years apart, right?
think so, yeah.
So you were coming in right as I was doing my thesis, which was crazy. As anyone that's done a thesis project at a theater school will know, it's a crazy experience. I don't remember all of the requirements, but I remember I think I had a 150-page paper when I did it.
Yeah, mine was something like that too. Yeah, it's giant. And I had to do two theses, a realized one and a paper one.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I had to do. I did the Angels in America with Britton Mock, scenic designer, and so that was in the main. That was on the main stage in the fall, and then for the spring semester, I had to do the 150-page paper, and I think it was like 60 renderings or something for
hmm
costumes, and then I had to do a scenic design. I had to have 5 different scenic plates, and I think I just had to talk about lighting design, and then I had and sound. And then you basically had to kind of write how you would direct the show too. It was long.
Yep,
What show did
yep.
you do for your theoretical?
My realized one was Seven Guitars by August Wilson, which was incredible because it takes place in Pittsburgh, and I could go to the actual backyard that he said the play took place in and kind of see how that all works. But then my paper one, I did Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots, which was this attempt at writing a musical with the Flaming Lips music, uh, and it only had one production. So I was trying to see if I could make it work as well. But again, I had to design the sets, the costumes, the lighting, everything for this thesis. It was crazy, but it was fun because I got to listen to the Flaming Lips for a year.
Right, that can't be bad. What for the costume portion? Did you do actual drawing renderings or did you do like lookbooks?
I did actual costume renderings.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It was my first time ever really attempting to do that. But they came out okay. And like it made me sort of realize just how much work costume design is. Is that weird? That like, I work with costume designers all the time, but actually having to do the renderings yourself and realize all of the detail work that goes into them and how, because set designer drawings and set designer renderings are very different than how costume designers do their renderings and do their process work. So realizing that, every time I draw a tiny thing on that, someone is going to say, oh, is that a stitch? Is that a drop of paint? What is that tiny thing?
Isn't that
Um,
crazy? Yeah.
yeah. Whereas in a set designer, I just kind of go, and there's something there, and I'll figure it out later, and then I'll do the full drafting package. I didn't realize that like these beautiful paintings are also the technical drawings, kind of.
Right. I think that's the difference, right? Is like scenic design, you can do a beautiful rendering and it's kind of more gestural and the shop understands that it's more gestural. And then your real design work comes in the drafting package of like the actual, like this beam here kind of situation. And then
Mhm.
also as a scenic designer, do you have to do like how it's constructed as well? Like the like technical stuff as well?
So kind of in the way that set design works is you have designers and then you have the shop.
Right.
My job as the designer is to say exactly how I want it to look. So I say I want there to look like there is a bolt here. The shop decides if that bolt is real or if that bolt is something painted on, basically. I still have a lot of say in that,
Right.
but like literally on my drawings, I write like I do not have the qualifications to determine how something is built, blah blah blah, to keep myself from getting sued if something falls.
Wait, is that
I,
really on your actual drafting packet?
yeah, yeah, every drafting package has this little disclaimer on it saying like, everything's just a suggestion. Please don't sue me if someone gets hurt, basically, which is kind of crazy to talk about.
If no one's seen a drafting packet, I'll put a little drafting packet like there. But the coolest thing about them is that like lower left hand or right hand corner. Like I think they're so beautiful in like how they're framed, and I've always kind of wanted to have like a big blueprint, kind of old school the blueprints
Mm-hmm.
in my apartment because they're just really cool. And I love when they put the little for human scale, like the little human silhouettes and stuff. I always think they're so like, and they'll like be cross hatched or just like linearly hatched, you know?
Yeah, old school hand drafting is beautiful. People rarely do it nowadays because it's much easier for shops to build stuff off of digital drawings because they can get the measurements right there and everything's much more thing. But a beautiful hand drafted thing is still like top notch. I actually hand drafted all the way until grad school
Oh, wow.
um, because so my whole like growing up as a set designer, I'm a little bit of an oddball because I started off as a technical person. Like I started off literally building scenery. Like that's how I started.
Well, we call that role like a TD kind of
Yeah,
technical director.
yeah, technical director or stage carpenter or things like that. So I was like, all of my work still to this day is kind of based in how it's constructed a little bit. So at my undergrad, you had to learn hand drafting before you moved on to computer aided design. Uh, so I learned hand drafting, and in all of our theater classes, you only hand drafted any show that you designed. You were only allowed to hand draft it, so that you learned that skill. And then in your last semester is when you learned uh, drafting on the computer. This is like almost 10 years ago now, so things have changed a lot since then.
Right. Can you
Uh,
give for people that haven't seen a hand drafting or know, like, can you what's the scale of like the actual
yeah,
like, you're working on vellum, right?
yeah. So it's usually 2 feet by 3 feet is
It's
usually
huge.
the yeah.
Yeah.
It's giant because it comes from the old blueprint sort of things.
What are the kind of the some of the computer programs that people learn on for drafting now?
Boom, AutoCAD. That's what I use. Some people hate it. AutoCAD is sort of the first drafting program. The newer one is called Vectorworks. It's much easier to use. AutoCAD is line based, so you draw a bunch of lines and they all connect and blah 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 blah. Whereas Vectorworks is shape based, so you draw rectangles and then you can fill them in and do stuff with them. Uh, Vectorworks works much better on Macs, and AutoCAD works much better on PCs. So it really comes down to what you were using as a computer when you were learning how to draft. And people like you can learn both of them, but they're similar enough that it's really tough to kind of know both. Um, so like I know AutoCAD and that's what I use. And the set design world is kind of split down the middle between AutoCAD users and Vectorworks users. Yeah, the like making physical models is kind of the most beautiful thing for
Yes.
when you're doing scenic design, like getting to build these tiny little chairs and things. It's so much fun and so beautiful, and you end up with these stunning dioramas and everything. But that costs a lot of money.
Right.
Building a model box can cost me like over $100 from start to finish, plus all the time involved in doing it and like my hours of my life being worth money. So I do a lot of digital modeling right now because like if I want to see what the wall looks like blue and see what the wall looks like red and see what the wall looks like green, if I was doing that in a physical model, I would have to physically make 3 different walls that are exactly the same, only in different colors and plot them in. Whereas if I'm doing it digitally, I literally click 2 buttons.
Is there like a design motif or a theme that you always kind of like always find you like going back to every time you design a show?
My friend Pam always makes fun of me when I say this, but I say that I'm kind of a structural expressionist when it comes to scenery. I am just as excited by how the scenery is being held up as I am by how it looks. So I oftentimes find the back of scenery just as beautiful as the front of scenery.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So a lot of my work sort of lets the material be. I don't do as much scenic painting or as much sort of um, old school techniques as some other people do. But I think that what is interesting about my work is that, you know, things will move in interesting ways, or things will fall or change, or you'll be able to tell what it is. I do a lot of sort of site-specific and immersive work as well. So I'm really interested in how the architecture of the space influences the performance. Even when it comes to a regular theater, like when you walk into any theater, you know, any show that you put in there will look different than it anywhere else. Even these touring shows that go from theater to theater, every time they go into a different theater, they have to shuffle stuff and change stuff. So I'm really interested in how the architecture and the history of the space informs the piece that you're creating.
Well, let's wrap up this section, and I think we'll wrap it up with like a final question, which is like, what's the best piece of advice that you've been given, or that you would like to pass on to younger theater artists in general?
The best piece of advice I ever got was, especially if you're interested in moving to New York to be a set designer, your first couple of years here, your job is not to be a set designer. Your job is not to find work. Your job is not to do any of those things. Your job is not to give up on yourself, because that is the toughest thing. Is the first couple of jobs you're going to get are going to not be good. The first couple of shows are going to, you know, you're not going to always have the best of time. You know, you're going to run into money issues, you're going to run into roommate issues, you're going to run into all kinds of things, and it's going to feel like a lot. But if you focus on yourself and focus on making sure that you recognize that the reason you're here is because you're good, and the reason that people hire you is because you know what you're doing, and you can push forward and find the way to survive, that is what's valuable. Making sure you're working on Broadway or on any type of specific thing is not valuable. What's valuable is you, and making sure that you are happy with what you're doing.
Gosh, I wish I could have heard that when I moved here, or maybe I did hear that and I wasn't ready to listen. That's the other thing about advice, is you're given advice over your life, and if you aren't ready to listen, you're not going to hear it. But when you are ready to listen, you will look back on that conversation and say, "Oh, that's what they were trying to tell me," you know,
Exactly.
kind of thing. Yeah, I think to go along with that advice is listen to advice, and really hear it, and take it to heart. Well, with that, we'll wrap up this week, and we'll do a part 2. And so I think anybody that wants to hear more about Dan's and my conversation about how scenic design and costume design pair, that's all in part 2. And there will be a link to that at the end of the video. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.
Thanks. See you soon.
Obviously, you're not leaving.